You already know the line. Even if you've never opened a Bible to find it, straight is the gate, and narrow is the way. Some version of that sentence has followed you your whole life on a church sign, in a sermon, in a warning from a grandmother who wanted you to be good. Matthew chapter 7, verse 13. Here's the part almost nobody stops to ask. Straight and narrow, are those two words for the same idea? Or two completely different words that got flattened into one over time? They're two different words. Completely different jobs. One describes a door, the other describes a hallway, and once you can tell them apart, the argument that fills the comment section under almost every video on this passage is the narrow gate about grace. Or is it about earning your way in, stops being an argument at all? Most people read narrow and difficult as two adjectives circling the same hard idea. They're not. One is a moment. The other is a condition. Hold on to that. Because by the end, it answers the exact question people keep fighting about underneath this verse. Picture a doorway cut straight into stone, narrow enough that you'd have to turn your shoulders sideways to fit through it. Now picture what's on the other side. Not open ground, a corridor cut through that same rock, walls close enough on both sides to brush your sleeves as you walk. One structure, two parts. A door you cross once, a hallway you keep walking. That's the whole shape of this teaching, and we're about to walk through both halves of it. This isn't a moral obstacle course. You win by trying hard enough. It isn't a secret password. Only the clever or the disciplined get to say, and it isn't a spiritual test with a passing score attached to it. It's a real door and a real hallway, and Jesus names both, on purpose, in two different words. Jesus says this near the end of the Sermon on the Mount, sitting on a hillside, teaching a crowd that has just heard him take apart every comfortable assumption they walked in with. Worth knowing why he's sitting down in the first place. In the first-century Jewish world, a traveling teacher stood to make a casual comment, but sat down when he meant to teach with real authority. It's the same posture a rabbi used inside a synagogue, settled and unhurried, signaling that what came next wasn't small talk. Matthew even tells you the disciples came and sat near him once he took that position. So this isn't Jesus tossing out a closing thought as everyone packs up to leave. He has sat down on purpose. And everything he's about to say carries the weight of a teacher who intends to be heard as final, not casual. That anger hiding behind clean hands still counts. That public prayer can become a performance instead of a conversation. That nobody actually gets to serve both God and money at once, no matter how they schedule it. Matthew chapter 5. Verse 20 has already told this crowd, their righteousness has to exceed the most disciplined religious people they know. Matthew chapter 6. Verse 24 has already told them no one serves two masters. So when Jesus says enter through the narrow gate, this crowd isn't hearing a new topic dropped in out of nowhere. They're hearing the hinge. The whole sermon has been swinging on the entire time. Here's where the Greek actually matters, not as trivia, but as the whole engine of this teaching. The word translated narrow in verse 13 is stenos tight, restricted, pressed in on both sides. It's a small word doing a big job, describing a gate that will not let a crowd through shoulder to shoulder, no matter how many people are standing in front of it. Now compare that to the other option sitting right there in the language. There was a perfectly good, far more common Greek word available for wide open, spacious, roumi. If all the text meant was there's a gate, and it's a little smaller than the other one, the opposite of Eurykoros could have carried that easily enough. Instead, it reaches for stenos, the sharper word, the one that shows up elsewhere, describing real constriction, the kind of pressure you feel in a crowd packed too tight, or a space that won't let you turn around. That's not a decorative word choice. That's the text telling you precisely how much room this door does not have. Quick side note here, because it trips up a lot of readers, and it's worth clearing up properly. In the King James Version, this gate is called straight, S-T-R-A-I-T, not straight, like a straight line. Two completely different English words that happen to sound identical out loud. Strait is the old word for narrow. You hear the same root in Strait of Gibraltar, a passage of water pinched tight between two coastlines. Not a body of water running in a perfectly direct line. Straight means direct, undeviating. The gate in Matthew 7 was never described as direct, it was described as narrow. Once you know that, a phrase you've heard your entire life stops sounding like a riddle and starts sounding exactly like what it actually is. That one small spelling mix-up has probably shaped more Sunday school lessons than almost anything else in this passage. But the gate is only half the sentence. Look at what happens right after it. Difficult is the way which leads to life. And here's the moment most readings blur straight past without slowing down. Difficult is not the same Greek word as narrow. It comes from a word connected to thlibo, to press, to crowd, to squeeze, to afflict. It's the word Paul reaches for in 2 Corinthians when he describes being hard-pressed on every side. It's the word John uses when Jesus tells his disciples, plainly, that in this world they will have real trouble. It's not a word describing one tight space you pass through, and then it's behind you. It's a word describing ongoing pressure, a condition you live inside, not a threshold you cross once and forget about. So look at what this sentence is actually doing. Structurally, the gate is narrow, stenos, a single point, entered once. The road is pressed, the thlibo family, a continuing state, walked every day after. English quietly flattens both of those into one word, hard. And once they're flattened, readers start doing something the original text never asked them to do, treating the whole passage as one long entrance exam. It isn't. It's a door and a hallway. Different words. Different jobs. Maybe you already know exactly what it feels like to walk through a door like that, not a hallway. A door, one decision, crossed once, that you cannot uncross afterward. A wedding vow spoken out loud in front of people who heard you say it. A lease signed with your own hand on a life you weren't sure you were ready for. A diagnosis said to your face in a small room, after which nothing about how you see your own days works quite the same way again. That's a stennis moment. Narrow, tight. No room to bring everything you were carrying through, it unchanged. But a moment. It happens once, and then it's behind you. Worth knowing one more thing about the word translated way here, since it explains why the corridor image fits so well. The Greek word is hodos, and it's the ordinary word for a physical road. The same word used for the actual dirt paths and hill routes people walked between towns in first-century Judea. Most of those local roads weren't the wide, paved Roman highways built for legions and trade carts. They were narrow footpaths worn into hillsides by generations of sandals, just wide enough for one traveler at a time, easy to lose in the dark, easy to wander off if you weren't paying attention. Jesus isn't reaching for an abstract metaphor when he calls the way to life narrow. He's describing the actual kind of road most of the people listening to him walked every single day, the kind that punishes a wandering foot immediately instead of forgiving it. So carry that forward into the hallway from the beginning of this video. It's not a poetic hallway floating somewhere abstract. It's a footpath, worn narrow by people who walked it before you, the kind where you feel the edge under your foot the moment you drift. The door was a single, decisive threshold. The hallway is a real, physical feeling road, still narrow, still asking for your attention on the ordinary days, not just the dramatic ones. That's the second evolution of the same image this whole video is built on. First a threshold, now a path with edges you can actually feel. That distinction alone is worth sitting with for a second before we go any further, because it's the exact place most readings of this passage quietly go wrong. They treat the door and the hallway as one long test, graded the same way from start to finish, when the text itself never asks you to grade them the same way at all. Keep the door and the hallway separate in your mind as we keep going, because the next part of this passage, the part almost every comment section fights about, only makes sense once you stop grading them on the same scale. One more sentence before we move there. The door asks what you're willing to leave behind. The hallway asks what you're willing to keep walking through. Two different questions, asked by two different words, in the same two verses. Keep both questions in mind, because the next section is where they finally meet, and it's where a debate that has run for centuries actually gets resolved by nothing more than paying attention to which word is doing which job. Quick word before we keep going, because the part that actually answers the grace versus works argument, the one that shows up in nearly every comment section under a video like this, is still ahead. Stay with me, because it's coming, and it's simpler than you'd expect. This two roads pattern didn't start with Jesus on a hillside. Either. Long before that, Moses stood in front of Israel on the plains of Moab, at the edge of a life he wouldn't get to enter himself, and told them plainly, "Today I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Now, choose life." Deuteronomy chapter 30. Not a vague spiritual mood, a nation standing on the edge of real consequence, told exactly what's at stake before they cross. Centuries later, the first psalm picks up the same pattern in a smaller frame. One person instead of a nation. Blessed is the one who doesn't walk in step with the wicked, who becomes instead like a tree planted by flowing water, bearing fruit in its season, roots reaching down where the ground never dries out. The wicked, by contrast, are described like chaff husks with no root, scattered by whatever wind happens to blow through that week. Psalm chapter 1. Then, centuries after that, Jesus tells a room full of frightened sheep owners that he himself is the door, John chapter 10, that whoever enters through him will be kept safe and will find real pasture. And later still, in an upper room the night before the cross, when Thomas admits out loud that he doesn't know the way and doesn't see how anyone could know it, Jesus doesn't hand him a set of directions. He says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." John chapter 14. 4 different scenes, 4 different centuries. One pattern held steady the entire time. God never leaves people guessing about where a road actually goes. He names the destination before you're asked to choose the gate. Maybe that's the part that actually lands hardest. If you've ever made a real decision in the dark, without knowing where it led, a move to a new city with no guarantee it would work out, a conversation you had to start without knowing how the other person would respond. This passage isn't that. You're not choosing a gate blind and hoping it turns out fine on the other side. You're told, in advance, exactly what's down each hallway. Here's something real about ancient gates worth knowing before the legend comes up, because it's the part of the picture people usually skip. Walled cities in the first century world typically ran on a strict schedule. The main gates, wide enough for carts and crowds, closed at sundown for security, guarded through the night. A traveler arriving late didn't get to bang on the main gate and wake the whole city. Many walled towns kept a smaller secondary opening for exactly that situation, narrow enough to control, easy for a guard to watch closely, built for one person at a time rather than a caravan. That much is ordinary ancient world city planning, not legend. It's the specific embellishment people build on top of that ordinary fact that goes further than the evidence allows. You've probably heard that popular embellishment, a small side door supposedly cut into the walls of Old Jerusalem, sometimes called the Needle's Eye Gate, where a camel had to kneel down and get unloaded before it could squeeze through. It's a vivid picture, and it's been preached from 1,000 pulpits over the years. Here's the honest answer. Though, there's no solid archaeological or historical support for a gate matching that description actually existing in first-century Jerusalem. And it's worth being clear about something else while we're here. That image usually gets borrowed from a completely different saying. In Matthew chapter 19, where Jesus tells a wealthy man, "It's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a sewing needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of God." That's not this passage. That's a different scene, about a different subject, likely weeks or months removed from the hillside, where Jesus talks about the narrow gate. 2 sayings, 2 moments, 2 lessons worth keeping separate, because collapsing them into one convenient story quietly changes what both of them are actually teaching. Once you strip the legend away, The actual text turns out to need it less than you'd think. It was never leaning on a clever gate story to make its point land. Here's another detail worth sitting with. Jesus doesn't only describe two gates. He describes two roads leading away from them, and he tells you plainly where each one ends. Wide is the gate, broad is the way, and many go in that way, leading to destruction. That's not a small detail to skip past. The broad road isn't described as obviously evil. It's described as roomy, comfortable, crowded in the sense of popular, not in the sense of pressed. It doesn't ask what you're carrying. It doesn't make you turn your shoulders to fit. It lets everything through without a scrape, every grudge relabeled as justice, every craving relabeled as need, every performance relabeled as devotion. Maybe you've felt both roads pull on you in the exact same week. A moment where the honest thing would cost you something real, and the comfortable lie was sitting right there, free of charge. So much easier to say out loud than the truth, and you felt, in your own chest, exactly which one was the wide gate and which one was the narrow. Here's a quick mechanical detail that actually helps this land. A door cut into thick stone isn't narrow by accident. A mason cutting an opening into a load-bearing wall has to leave enough rock on either side to hold the weight above it. Widen the opening, and you weaken the whole structure. The narrowness isn't stinginess. It's what keeps the building standing. That's a strange but useful way to think about a demanding command from God, not as a door made small to keep people out, but as a door that has to be exactly that size to hold the weight of what it's actually built to carry. That's the pressure. The second word, the Thlibo family, is actually naming, not punishment. Not proof you chose wrong if things get hard. Just an honest description of what it feels like to keep walking a road that keeps pressing against everything in you that wants to go wide instead. Paul tells the believers in Corinth they're hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed. Same word, family. Jesus tells his own disciples, the night before he dies, that in this world they will have trouble. Same word, family, again. It's not a strange or shameful thing to feel that pressure. It's the road doing exactly what the text already told you it would do. So here's the honest question. The one that's actually been running underneath nearly every argument in the comments of a video like this, and it deserves a direct answer instead of a dodge. Is the narrow gate something you earn your way through? Is Jesus describing a moral effort be good enough? Disciplined enough? Righteous enough? And only then does the door finally open for you? No. Look closely at what the door actually requires, and what the hallway actually requires, and you'll see they were never asking the same thing. The door is stenos, narrow enough that you cannot carry through it the illusion that you saved yourself, that your own moral effort was ever going to be the thing that got you across that threshold. Paul writes plainly to the believers, in Ephesus, you have been saved by grace, through faith, and even that itself is a gift, not something earned. So no one gets to boast about having walked through under their own strength. That's the door. But once you're through it, the hallway is real, and it presses. James writes just as plainly that faith without any action behind it is dead, not a threat hanging over your salvation, but an honest description of what living faith actually looks like from the inside. It moves. It costs something. It presses against the parts of you still leaning toward the wide road out of habit. The door is entered by grace. The hallway is what a surrendered life actually feels like once you're standing inside it. Those were never competing claims fighting for the same territory. They're two different words, answering two different questions, about two different parts of the same structure. Once you see it that way, the whole argument in the comments starts to look like two people describing the same building from two different rooms, and accusing each other of lying about what's inside it. A workplace where telling the truth costs you the easier version of the story. A family dinner where loving the person across the table means saying the hard thing instead of the comfortable thing. Again, for what feels like the 100th time, a friendship where staying has meant absorbing something you didn't deserve, because walking away felt like the wide road and staying felt like the narrow one. A quiet night where the whole shape of your life would be so much easier if you just stopped caring about the thing you already know is true. All of it. The same pressure, the same hallway, showing up in a different room every single time. Think about an ordinary hallway for a second. Not a church. Not anything dramatic, just an old building somewhere. The kind with walls close enough on both sides that you instinctively pull your shoulders in as you walk it. You don't panic in a hallway like that. You don't call it cruelty that the builder didn't make it wider. You just walk it, a little more carefully than open ground, aware of both walls at once, moving forward anyway because you know exactly where it leads. That's closer to what this passage is actually describing than any legend about a camel ever was. You crossed a door once. You're still walking a hallway. And the mercy in this whole passage was never that the door or the hallway would be wide and comfortable. The mercy is that you were told, ahead of time, exactly what both of them would feel like, and exactly where they lead. The same mercy Moses gave a nation standing at the edge of a river. The same mercy the first psalm gave one quiet reader. The same mercy Jesus gave a room full of frightened sheep owners. And a disciple named Thomas, who just needed someone to say plainly, "I am the way." This isn't a passage designed to make you afraid you didn't earn your way in. It isn't a passage handing you a checklist to finish before God will finally love you. And it isn't a vague blessing that costs you nothing at all to hold. It's a door, crossed by grace, and a hallway, walked in the pressure of an honest life, narrow enough that you can't carry your excuses through unchanged, pressed enough that you'll feel it on most ordinary days, and leading somewhere real enough that the discomfort was never actually the point. The discomfort was just what walking that particular hallway honestly feels like from the inside, the whole way through. This is one study of a passage believers have wrestled with, argued about, and returned to for 2,000 years, and the richest thing you can do with any of it is open Matthew chapter 7 yourself, and see what you find sitting inside those two words. If this helped you see a familiar verse a little more clearly, hit subscribe and leave a comment. Even one word helps more than you'd think. And if there's someone in your life who's been stuck arguing the wrong side of this exact debate, send this to them. It might end the argument faster than either of you expected. Houston's gone quiet tonight. And if you're winding down with this too, may the one who is both the door and the way still be found walking that narrow hallway with you. God bless you.